Hi, I'm Mayor Allen Beach. It's important that local communities such as Lynbrook celebrate the founding of the greatest country on earth 250 years ago. Men and women all over the new nation demonstrated their bravery, their fortitude, and their willingness to sacrifice everything for the greater good. But history isn't about the triumphs of an entire nation. It's also about what happened locally, the good and the bad. And that is what our historian, Art Mattson, has done in this video. He has presented his extensive research into the positive and negative of things that happened 250 years ago, right here and near Rockaway. That is the old name for what is today's Lynbrook, Rockville Center, East Rockaway, and Hewlett. This video may surprise some of you, but isn't that what makes history so great? The surprise? Enjoy the show.
Okay, welcome to America 250. What happened right here? Today I'm going to tell you not only what happened in the 13 colonies of the new America 250 years ago when the Declaration of Independence was signed, but what happened on the very ground that you walk on here. As the historian of the village of Lynbrook and the author of 2 books on local history, I deal in facts. I don't deal in make-believe. I'll make an exception tonight because I'm going to pretend for just a minute that I am George Washington come back to Lynbrook. Yes, I am George Washington. The last time I was here on Long Island, it was in 1790, a few years after the Revolutionary War. I came to thank the wonderful patriots out here on Long Island who helped to win the war. But that does not include the people who lived around here in near Rockaway. They were a bunch of Tories. Yes, I call this place near Rockaway because that's the name that it had back in the 1700s. Not Lynbrook or whatever you call this place, East Rockaway, Hewlett, places like that. It's hard to believe. But folks from near Rockaway even formed an armed militia. They attempted to kidnap me. Can you believe it? Kidnap me and turn me over to the British. If I should ever have dared to come out this way from New York City. And that might have ended the Revolutionary War right there and then, before the Declaration of Independence was even signed. It makes you so angry to think about it that Americans from around here could have betrayed me so much that I better let Mr. Mattson come back before I utter some terrible swearing which would violate my own oath against doing that. Goodbye. Phew. Didn't expect that. The village historian is back. As you will learn today, George Washington did have every right to be angry. He already had a monumental task of organizing an army of farmers, woodsmen, tradesmen into a fighting force of about 20,000 men. And he was up against well-trained troops. The troops of King George of Britain, that peaked at 131,000. Making matters worse, 25,000 Americans. I didn't say British, Americans. I didn't say Germans, I said Americans. Fought alongside the British against the Patriots. Now, some of these American loyalists, or Tories as they were called, they wore special uniforms. And they were also called green coats at times. Others simply wore green sprigs in their hats. Now, Long Island alone added 1,800 troops to the British side, and many of them came from around here. The Revolutionary War began in April 1775. That's when the first shots were fired at Lexington and Concord. in Massachusetts. A year later, the Continental Congress met in Philadelphia. It was a broiling temperatures of July, 250 years ago. Their purpose was to sign a Declaration of Independence. While they were meeting, shocking word arrived from New York. 45 British ships had anchored in the lower bay off Staten Island. They had on them 32,000 troops. And this was the largest planned sea invasion, seaborne, the world would see until Normandy. Incredible for the time. War on a massive scale was about to begin. Now, despite this grim news, 250 years ago, the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence signed it and published it for the world to see. The document demonstrated their uncompromising dedication to a new and independent American republic. And the final sentence of that declaration truly demonstrates their commitment. And it was and is. We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Each of those signers, when they put those words down, knew that this was a death sentence for them, probably by hanging, if Great Britain would win. Now, that struggle for independence would last another 7 long years, until 1783, when the Treaty of Paris was signed. It's only right that 250 years later, that patriotic songs are sung, that the names and places of the Revolutionary War echo throughout our great country, like these. The Battle of Lexington and Concord, April 1775. The Battle of Bunker Hill, June 1775. Washington crossing the Delaware on Christmas night, 1776. The Battle of Trenton on December 26th, 1776. And the Battle of Saratoga, October 1777. That was the turning point of the war. And of course, the winter, the terrible winter at Valley Forge, December 1777. And then the final victory at Yorktown, October 19, 1781. Today we even celebrate defeats, terrible defeats, such as the Battle of Long Island, the biggest battle of the war, right here on the island. Now, it's not the 2,000 American casualties that's talked about. It's not the 400 British that are remembered today. It's that George Washington concocted a brilliant retreat at night across the East River to Manhattan to save what was left of his army. And it's that what was remembered, his brilliant, impromptu decision to do that. Now, out on Long Island, it is the Culper Spy Ring, Setauket, that gets all the attention. And the names of its members, there's Benjamin Talmadge, there's Anna Strong, Abraham Woodhull. Those names are widely known today. That's mostly because the Culper Spy Ring has had so many hyper-dramatized TV series, books, pamphlets about Anna Strong and her petticoat warning symbol, about the messages that Benjamin Talmadge wrote in invisible ink. Those are the things that remembered. But today, I want to tell you about the Revolutionary War deeds of the people who lived not in Massachusetts, not out in Setauket, but right here in what we call East Rockaway, Rockville Center, Hewlett, and Lynbrook, but that George Washington called near Rockaway. Now, as you can see on this old map, the area we live in was called near Rockaway. It's in the middle circle. We were, you see, nearer to the town of Hempstead, where the government was. And that, the lower circle, is Far Rockaway, which was further from the town of Hempstead. Now, it would be terrific if on this 250th anniversary of our great country that I could tell you how the colonists of near Rockaway fought and died for the ideals of the Declaration of Independence. But, like George Washington, I can't lie. It's not like that. As much as a fifth of the overall American population remained loyal to the king. And in New York City and in near Rockaway, it was closer to half. They call themselves loyalists. The patriots call them Tories. I'll be using both words in this presentation. Now, the Tories of near Rockaway were so completely against independence that they actively supported the British for all 8 years of the war. Things were different just 15 miles away, on the north side of the island, the part bordering the Sound, and farther east in Suffolk County. There, the Patriots outnumbered the Tories by far. Why the difference? Why the difference between the north side of the island in Suffolk County and this part of the south side of Long Island? Well, the earlier history of Long Island may give us some clues. So bear with me for a moment while I depart from the Revolutionary War theme for just a few minutes, while I discuss the history of near Rockaway long before the Revolutionary War. For thousands of years, the Lenape natives lived in New York, Delaware, Pennsylvania, and Connecticut. Two groups of those Lenape settled in the southwestern part of Long Island where we live. These were the Canarsie and the Rockaways. Over many generations, the Rockaway people developed a system of farming, fishing, hunting, and gathering. Their lives were healthy, far healthier than anything that England or Europe in general offered to it, with its squalid, overcrowded cities and its many communicable diseases such as smallpox and the Black Plague. In 1641, the Dutch arrived from Brooklyn to exchange trade goods for furs with the Lenape. For 2 years, this was a profitable arrangement for both sides. Then, in 1643, some new people arrived. They spoke another strange language, English. They were Robert Fordham and John Carman. The two men had rowed across Long Island Sound from Connecticut and had trekked across Long Island to the land of the Rockaways. On the way, they had to cross the vast 62 square mile treeless Hempstead Plains. What you see here is the only preserved piece of the plains left today. It's 1/10 of a square mile space, and it's near Nassau Community College. Now, the Englishmen could imagine that the plains would be perfect for grazing their sheep, horses, their cattle. Of course, the Hempstead Plains have changed a lot today, and this is what it looks like now. Wall-to-wall suburbia. South of the plains, the two Englishmen found lush woodlands and clear freshwater streams flowing down to the bays. And they found hundreds of people already living there. They were the Rejkwaaki, who the English erroneously referred to as Rockaway. Now, Fordham and Carman offered the Rockaways a great deal as far as the Lenape, the Rockaways, were concerned. A few knives, axes, mirrors, and beads, great stuff. All they had to do was sign a piece of paper. No furs needed, just sign this piece of paper. The natives had no idea what a deed was. After signing, they had unknowingly signed away their land from the middle of the Hempstead Plains to the sea. This is pretty much the entire town of Hempstead today, from the village of Hempstead all the way south to Long Beach. The Rockaways soon found out what a deed of sale was. English farmers began fencing in their land and chasing the Rockaway trespassers away. By the time of the Revolutionary War, the Rockaway natives were almost gone, many of them killed by disease and from the taking away of their hunting grounds. The area of the Rockaway then began to grow slowly to a sleepy collection of farms, family farms. Some even used slaves from Africa. Now, there were 2 grist mills in near Rockaway, both of them along the Mill River. One of those grist mills still stands. It's in East Rockaway. I want you to note the 3rd-story shuttered upper window in the picture. There were also upper windows on the now long-gone Mattson mill. This, by the way, and a few other images are AI created. There is no picture of the Mattson mill available. It was located on Smith's Pond in Rockville Center. That, of course, is at Merrick Road and Ocean Avenue on the border with Lynbrook. These upper windows will soon play a part in our near Rockaway Revolutionary War story. Even before shots were fired at Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts in April 1775, patriotic fervor was sweeping across the country, across the 13 colonies, but not here in sleepy near Rockaway. The Long Island Plains had become a lot more than just an impressive geographical feature. The people living on the north side, on the necks of land facing towards the Sound, they found it easier to sail to Connecticut than to travel dirt roads to New York City. Their family connections, their trading connections, they were across the Long Island Sound. And that's where the rebellious New England patriots lived. Contrast, the residents of near Rockaway had commercial and family connections to New York City. The city was their biggest customer for everything that near Rockaway produced: fresh vegetables, flour, seafood, hay, cordwood, lumber. And New York City's residents were not at all like New Englanders. They considered themselves Englishmen first, Americans second. And they saw no reason to revolt against the king. In 1776, hundreds of New York City Tories celebrated the signing of their own declaration. Not a declaration of independence, but their declaration of dependence. And that's what they entitled it, the Declaration of Dependence. Now, it was the same right here near Rockaway. Not only here, but the entire town of Hempstead, at least the southern portion of it. Look at this amazing formal resolution passed by the Hempstead Town Board. I'll read it because it's on April 4th, 1775, that the Hempstead Town Board resolved to give true and faithful allegiance to His Majesty King George III, our gracious and lawful sovereign. This from the Town Board of Hempstead. So upset were the patriots up on the North Shore, on the north side of the Hempstead Plains that they voted very quickly to secede from the town of Hempstead and create a new town, the town of North Hempstead, which they did. And that's the way it is today. Now things went from words to gunshots when Tory blood was spilled right here near Rockaway. This is how it happened. In 1776, the loyal Tories of near Rockaway formed a secret militia, just like George Washington told you earlier, with officers and men, and they had guns. East Rockaway's Richard Hewlett was in charge. He would later serve in the British Army as lieutenant colonel. At the time, George Washington was in New York City preparing a defense plan to repel the British invasion of Long Island. Their invasion, of course, was from the sea. And Washington had reason to be suspicious of the Tories all around him. New York City Tories had even tried to poison his food. So when his spies on Long Island warned him about a Tory plot out there in near Rockaway to kidnap him, if he should ever come out to near Rockaway, he was outraged. He sent orders to his Minutemen to disarm the near Rockaway militia and throw them in jail and seize their guns. Now, when word arrived that Patriot Minutemen were on the way, the Tories employed their early warning symbol, the system. They hung a white cloth from an upper-story window of Anthony DeMott's gristmill at Smith's Pond in Rockville Center. Now, seeing the white cloth, 9 of the Tories gathered their guns and fled north up Ocean Avenue, past the mill pond, and into Tanglewood Swamp, which was much larger then than it is today. The 9 Tories were George, Daniel, Joseph, and Richard Smith, not necessarily brothers, though some were, Anthony, Michael, and David DeMott, Benjamin Pettit, and one other man whose name is not known. And he enters into this story. With Washington's troops closing in, the Tories realized they were not only outnumbered, they were outgunned. They were desperate. They piled into flat-bottomed sedge boats and paddled out into the middle of the swamp. They thought they were safe out there. The leader of the Patriots, the Minutemen, Stephen Ryder of Jamaica, climbed into a tree to see where the heck the Tories had disappeared to. One of the Tories in a sedge boat, the stranger, then made a terrible mistake. He fired a warning shot at Ryder. Now Ryder spotted then the flash and the smoke from the Tory's musket, and he was a skilled marksman. He fired, and he put a bullet through the shoulder of a man in a sedge boat. It was George Smith. It wasn't even the man whose name we don't know. At this point, the Tories realized they were all dead ducks sitting out there in the sedge boats. The 9 plotters surrendered, thus ending the Battle of the Swamp almost before it started. Ryder's men hauled the 9 Tories to Jamaica and threw them in jail. As the jail door was being closed, one of the near Rockaway Tories yelled out, "We would sooner fight for the king than Congress, and we totally deny the authority of that body." This was not an idle claim. These Tories had already been helping the British. Royal Navy ships had been gathering, arriving daily from Boston and Rhode Island, and anchoring off Staten Island. And as I mentioned before, they were carrying 32,000 English and Hessian troops for an invasion of the island, of Long Island. The Tories in near Rockaway were happy to sail out from Hewlett Bay to sell the British fresh food and even sell small boats to them in exchange for gunpowder. A few weeks later, British troops landed in Brooklyn, this is a few weeks after the Battle of the Swamp, landed in Brooklyn and were victorious at the Battle of Long Island. And they immediately released from jail the 9 near Rockaway Tories that had been captured in the swamp. And they arrested Stephen Ryder, the Minuteman marksman who had shot George Smith in the swamp, and they put him into the same jail. The 9 newly released Tories returned to near Rockaway. Some of them enlisted in the British Army, or they spent the next several years of the war collaborating with the British. They grossly abused their increasingly angry Patriot neighbors. They confiscated their food. They took their animals. They took the fodder. They took the firewood and sold it to the British. They also forced their neighbors to quarter troops in their houses, in their barns. As a result, many of the patriots of near Rockaway fled across the Great Plains to the Long Island Sound to Connecticut. When the Revolutionary War finally ended, many years later, patriots of near Rockaway returned, and they began to take revenge against the Tory neighbors who had abused them so. At first, it was just tricks and jokes and name-calling. And then things began to threaten to get violent. So bad it was that quite a few of the near Rockaway Tory families, including several members of the Pearsall family, the Hewlett family, they boarded ships, British ships, to British-controlled Canada, New Brunswick, Canada specifically. Some even went to Bermuda. Quite a few of them never returned to Long Island, including the Tory Lieutenant Colonel Richard Hewlett, who never came back, ended up dying in New Brunswick, Canada. It took years for tensions between the Tories and the Patriots to settle down in near Rockaway. After what had been close to a local civil war, some members of the Pearsall and Hewlett family and other Tory families did return, at last, from their self-imposed exiles in Canada and Bermuda. They reclaimed their homes, their lands, and became leading citizens of near Rockaway. The Pearsall family, for example, ended up founding the very village of Lynbrook, once called Pearsall's and Pearsall's Corners. And so the takeaway from this entire story that I've told today is that 250 years ago, a few brave and inspired Americans, and then more and more that joined up, risked their lives and their fortunes against the overwhelming force of the British Empire, and even against opposition at home. And since then, we in our country have had missteps and differences, but Americans have always joined together to make and preserve what is the greatest country on our planet. And so I'm saying goodbye for George Washington and for Art Mattson, Lynbrook historian. Thank you for watching. The Ed.